William C. Durant was born in 1861, the same year the Civil War started. By 1901, he had made a fortune running one of the largest companies in the country that made horse-drawn carriages. When Henry Ford came along and started to mass-produce automobiles, William Durant was skeptical. He thought that Americans would never buy cars. They smelled bad, they made noise, they broke down a lot. But eventually, Durant saw that automobiles were here to stay, and he saw an opportunity. So he used a portion of his fortune, the fortune he had made from horse-drawn carriages, and he used that money to purchase a struggling little car manufacturer called Buick. Durant was a brilliant business leader. He's the one who came up with the idea of local car franchises who sell you your car. You know, I'll go to Royal Chevrolet and buy myself a Malibu. He came up with that whole concept of local franchises. He created a corporate structure and a leadership community that soon made Buick the best-selling car in America. He was ahead of Henry Ford for a while. And he didn't stop there. Soon he and a few other partners created another little company. You may have heard of it. It's called General Motors. Durant invested a great deal of his own fortune in this new company. He was the man in charge. He set about buying up other little car companies. You may have heard another of these little companies he purchased. It was called Cadillac. He was a very successful, very good business leader. And then one day, at a board of directors meeting of the company he started, they said to him, maybe anticipating Donald Trump's TV show, "You're fired. You're fired." New investors, new advisors had arrived at General Motors, and they were calling Durant's leadership into question. So he was literally kicked out of his own company, thrown out of the company he started. History is full of stories about women and men who are brilliant and talented, and they create something or they begin something, and then other people come along and they say to the founder, "Get lost." What must that be like? Well, we could ask St. Paul that same question. Remember, as we listen to today's first reading, St. Paul was the founder of the Christian community in Corinth. He went to Corinth around the year 51, and there he preached the faith for the first time. He taught them the gospel for the first time. And even after he left Corinth to preach in other cities, he always stayed in touch with that church that he had started in Corinth. This was the community, the church that he had founded. He would always be their spiritual father. Or would he? And I ask that question because in today's first reading, St. Paul is dealing with a difficult reality. He has been on the road preaching the gospel, starting other churches, and while he was away, new preachers, new teachers of the gospel had arrived in Corinth, and they were stirring up trouble. Apparently, these newcomers, these late arrivers, were calling St. Paul's message and his methods into question. They were making the people of Corinth wonder if Paul could be trusted. Had he taught them the real truth about Jesus? Had he led the community properly? Paul wasn't there to answer the accusations in person. So what happened? In the minds of many people in Corinth, St. Paul got fired. And they began to look for a new spiritual father, new spiritual leadership in Corinth. Until Paul hears about all of this. And in this part of the second letter to the Corinthians that we're hearing today, he addresses this situation head on. Apparently, the troublemakers had made the Corinthians doubt whether Paul was actually qualified to be an apostle. They made people doubt whether Paul was qualified to be a preacher, to teach the truth of Jesus. What were his qualifications? And in today's famous passage, Paul, in effect, provides his resume. And he says, and this is my modern translation, "You want to know what makes me qualified to preach the gospel of Jesus? I'll tell you." Apparently, these troublemakers were boasting that they could be trusted since they were born and raised as Jews. So Paul says at the beginning of today's passage, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they children of Israel? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? Me too. And then St. Paul shifts. Apparently, the troublemakers were questioning whether Paul was as effective in serving Christ as they were. So Paul, with an ironic tone, says, well, maybe they are good servants of Christ, but so am I. And what is the proof that I am a servant of Christ? Listen to what he says. This is his proof that he is a servant of Christ. I have spent time in prison because of my faith. I've been beaten up because of my faith. The Jewish leaders have whipped me on 5 separate occasions because of my faith. Paul's unspoken question is this: have these troublemakers suffered this much for the gospel? But we already know the answer. They haven't. But now that Paul is proving his point, you can't stop him. He goes on and he says, for the sake of Christ, I have endured shipwrecks. I've been seized by robbers. I've been hungry. I've been thirsty. I've been exhausted. I've dealt with wild beasts and endured endless hardships. Oh, and by the way, the reason I'm not with you now is that I'm busy out there founding other churches where lots of other people are hearing about Jesus for the first time. So let's review. Imprisonments, beatings, lashes. Normally, most people would consider those to be examples of failure. Normally, you wouldn't include these brushes with the law on your resume. But St. Paul's point is this: we follow a Savior who was crucified. So the proof of our faithfulness is not found in our degrees or credentials. The proof of our faithfulness is found in the way that we share the suffering of Jesus and share the suffering of his people. They tried to push Paul out of the community he founded, but he reminded them that the true sign of Christian discipleship is our willingness to bear hardships with Christ and to help others who bear hardships. By the way, because I know you're going to ask me after Mass, William Durant eventually found a way to take control of General Motors again, and then they kicked him out again. History is full of such stories. Oh, and by the way, because I know you're going to ask me after Mass, St. Paul continued to be the spiritual leader of the Corinthian church. But he had other similar struggles with other churches he had founded, like the one in Galatia. Maybe this is what happens when we follow a Savior who was despised and rejected. After all, they tried to get rid of Jesus, but he keeps coming back.